Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Educated Mormon. My name is Nathaniel P. Wilkerson, and today we're going to be talking about the Book of Mormon, DNA, and related issues. So we're going to dive into that, and first off, I'm going to pull up this website here, and as you're all familiar, it's the Gospel Topic Essays on the church's website. And if you scroll down here, I think it's number 4. They have a nice little essay here about the Book of Mormon and different DNA studies that they've looked at. So I just wanted to pull this up first and just kind of explain how they approach it and kind of what their conclusions are. So I'm not particularly impressed with this essay, to be honest, because it just kind of dances around the subject more than anything else, and tries to find reasons why we can't really put our finger down on why there is no DNA evidence that supports the Book of Mormon. So basically, there is no Hebrew DNA that we're aware of that's been found in the indigenous populations throughout North America and South America. And then, of course, they go into a whole bunch of, different DNA theories and studies and things like the bottlenecks and founder effects and genetic drift. So all of this DNA stuff, I guess you can call it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the essay here, basically the final sentence really sums it up better than anything else, in my opinion. And it just says both critics and defenders of the Book of Mormon would like to use DNA studies to support their views. So, people that are saying, hey, there's no DNA, they're using the studies for that. And then you have critics or defenders who are trying to use different DNA studies to also support their view that somehow there is some historical or Hebrew DNA that's present in the Aboriginal population of the United States or Canada or North America or anywhere within the two continents. So anyways, but that's pretty much what they conclude, that really we don't know enough, so our position is that we can't either prove or disprove the authenticity or historicity of the Book of Mormon with DNA. Okay, so let's put that away for now. All right, so let's move on to our first slide here. So because of the DNA studies that came out in the mid or early 2000s, basically 2006, maybe it was 2007, we ended up having a change made to the introduction page of the Book of Mormon. And basically this change was just a couple words, really. The principal ancestors of the American Indians, that line was changed to among the ancestors of the American Indians. So basically, I think that was a concession made by the church, or at least admitting that there was a problem, and that the DNA was not supporting the Book of Mormon's narrative that all of these people had descended or from Hebrew lineage. So that right there is a big red flag in my opinion, because it's basically admitting, hey, it's not historical. All right, so I would recommend highly that if you are interested in the DNA, first of all, Simon Southerton, Dr. Simon Southerton, I think he's Australian. I read his book when it first came out. I think it was around 2005, Losing a Lost Tribe. And he really gets into the DNA and what all the aspects are and all of the kind of the nuts and bolts of it all. And of course, he has appeared at a number of different podcasts and made many excellent presentations. I think these are from the Mormon Stories YouTube channel or podcast. So anyways, he has done quite a few presentations. So, but if you listen to anything he has to say, and most recently I just listened to this one here, done on Gospel Tangents, which by the way is also another excellent resource as far as just interesting Mormon history and theology and stuff. It's just an excellent YouTube channel. Big fan of it, by the way. So I think this particular episode was actually originally recorded in 2018. But again, Dr. Southerton goes into his thoughts on, why none of this works. So the DNA thing is basically, as far as he's concerned, and I would say he's a pretty reliable expert. He's not trying to. By the way, he is he is LDS, I suppose, but I think eventually the church excommunicated him for his work, his book, even though I don't think there was any good rationale to do that. But his claims and what he has researched are, I would say, pretty solid in my opinion. So I would be more than willing to take what he has and to trust his conclusions. Okay, so basically we can talk now a little bit about some of the other issues I think that plague the Book of Mormon. And Thomas Stuart Ferguson is an interesting case in my opinion. And I actually read this book here, Quest for the Gold Plates. I can't remember who wrote it, but basically it's a biography of Thomas Ferguson's story and his quest to find evidence for the Book of Mormon, actual hard evidence, archaeological evidence. And he spent, the better part of his adult life working on this. And I think he is the one that's actually started most of the excavations down in the Central America during the 1950s. I think it was called the New World Archaeological Foundation. And eventually, the church and BYU got involved with all of that. But yeah, the interesting thing about his story, of course, is that toward the end of his life, I guess, he had spent the better part of maybe 20 years or so trying to find any real evidence for the Book of Mormon. And at the end of it, by about, I would say, 1967 or so, he concluded that there was no real evidence, and he had not found any. And it's quite an interesting story, and I like this quote here: "You can't set the Book of Mormon geography down anywhere because it is fictional and will never meet the requirements of dirt archaeology." So that was a quote from Thomas Stuart Ferguson. So yeah, his story is really quite interesting. I highly recommend reading it. And actually, there's an excellent Wikipedia article on him as well. So, so the other issue that that is brought up, of course, often, and of course, it's kind of an excuse in my opinion. If you read through the gospel topic essay on the one that's put out by the church here, basically, they admit and they say. And then so they go and say that the continent was obviously had other people on it when Lehi and the Mulekites arrived. So basically, because of that, their genetics and their DNA got mixed with the existing populations, and so therefore that is the reasoning behind us not being able to actually find their Hebrew DNA anymore in the existing populations, and just basically all we can see is the Asian DNA that's present today. Well, that doesn't hold water in my opinion, because basically the Book of Mormon itself states that the continent, or the North America or South America or both, was a land of promise. And then you read here in 2 Nephi 1:8. And basically, it says here, "And behold, it is wisdom that this land should be cut as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, that there would be no place for an inheritance." So the way it reads to me is that, the land was uninhabited. It was barren, or not barren, but it was barren of any human or other peoples that would have overrun the land or inhabited it. So that is basically the Book of Mormon itself is stating that. So, we can make the assumption that, then it wasn't full of other people, and therefore there is no reason that the Hebrew DNA got washed out, or any other excuse that is commonly used. So that's one point that jumps out at me immediately with regards to the DNA arguments that are made in the gospel topic essays, and by other apologists too. I don't buy the whole, there's just other populations that were, basically overwhelming the Book of Mormon populations. Okay, so other issues and significant issues, in my opinion, in the Book of Mormon itself, it talks about steel swords. I think maybe the sword of Laban wasn't a steel sword, but we talk about Nephi having his steel bow and these steel swords that were rusting in the battlefields. And we have verses within the Book of Mormon that talk about horses and chariots. And then, of course, when you start talking about the battles themselves, you have hundreds of thousands of combatants. I think there's like 250 or 240,000 combatants, at the last battles of the Lamanites at the Hill Cumorah. And of course, the Hill Cumorah, they've swept the hill and they've found absolutely nothing. So there's no signs of any great battles or remains or even any significant arrowheads or swords or spears or any of that stuff. So yeah, you would think that we would find a lot more, artifacts that support these great battles that occurred. Sure, they're gonna, over thousands of years, we have decay and we have all that, but even so, I think it would be, inconsistent or dishonest to say that there wouldn't be some remains, at least, arrowheads and arrows and spears and that sort of thing left behind. And again, as mentioned previously, the Book of Mormon speaks of no other inhabitants in the land, and I've got a couple references there that you can look up if you want. So yeah, it was a land of promise. It was preserved for a righteous people that would inhabit it. All right, so what is the conclusion with all this? Well, and I haven't covered every single anachronism. There's a lot more. Again, all you have to do is hit the CES letter, and there's a lot more. And then there's a lot of podcasts and presentations out there that dive into a lot more details on this sort of thing. But my conclusion is, and I'm looking at this from a faithful perspective, simply that the Book of Mormon is not historical. And I know for a lot of people that is really, really hard to swallow. Initially for me, I think it was hard to swallow because myself, I have some Native American ancestry, so I always considered myself, Lamanite and Lamanite heritage, and so when I realized that the Book of Mormon is not historical, then I'm like, well, then what? Who am I? Like, what am I? I guess I'm Native American, and Native Americans came across the Bering Strait, right? And still we don't history. Obviously the DNA support that, and there have been apparently multiple waves of migrants and coming across from the Asian subcontinent. But yeah, it's pretty jarring at first, but I think the DNA evidence, the Hebrew DNA evidence, is completely non-existent based on everything I've read, everything I've heard. And even though, the apologists try to apply, and very unsuccessfully in my opinion, it's just not going to work. Anachronisms, again, there's too many even to list here, as I state there. Really, where there's smoke, there's fire. And it'd be one thing, if there was just like one or two anachronisms. But, when you start having them pile up one after the other, and it's like, okay, where's the steel? Where's the swords? Where are the horses? Wait, there's horses in North America or South America? Pre-Columbian horses? Come on. And elephants and, just problems like that. None of that adds up. The other thing that's really interesting is the geography. And, that could be a whole nother video. But, yeah, none of the proposed models seem to actually work. And all of them seem to have major problems. You've got the limited geography model. You've got the Heartland model now. Used to have the hemispheric model that seemed to be the one that was pushed. And, limited geography, I guess, is probably the most heavily promoted at this point by the church. The Mesoamerican limited geography models. Basically, Guatemala, Mexico is kind of the site. But, of course, the major problem with that is it seems like Joseph Smith himself was stating that the Hill Cumorah was up in New York. So how did we have I guess there's two Comoras basically. So we can get into the two Comora theory. Anyways, it becomes problematic. And then, of course, I think the largest thing for me, and I just ask this honestly, I say, look, we've been digging in Mexico and Central America and South America and even, archaeological work in the North American continent for years now. I mean, and to date, there is absolutely zero examples or artifacts, that have been validated that have any Hebrew, Egyptian, or Reformed Egyptian. So there is zero evidence. I mean, there is, you could say, well, okay, maybe we just haven't looked hard enough, and maybe it'll eventually be found. And I'm not saying, that could be a possibility, but you look at any other civilizations that we've done research work on. I mean, Romans, Babylonians, even the Hebrew, Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, all sorts of. They find thousands of artifacts. I mean, sure, some of them are just little pieces of pottery or this or that, but they find something, right? I mean, and we have zero. We have absolutely nothing, zero to date. And in 2005, when I was really starting to research a lot of this, I had purchased a book, and it had what was called the Lock on it, in it. And I think it's called the Travels of Moroni and Mormon. And I go into that a little bit in another video I've made. But basically, it had Reformed Egyptian on one side, and then it had Mayan characters on the other side. And when I first saw that, I was almost jumped out of my seat, and I was just like, man, we finally have evidence. And then, of course, I come to find out it was just a fraud. It's a fake piece created by somebody to, I mean, heavens knows why they do that sort of thing. But basically, yeah, I mean, at that point, I'm just like, okay, there's got to be some evidence somewhere, right? I mean, okay, this one might have been a fraud, but somebody's found something. I mean, I knew, that BYU had and the church had this, these different parties that were going down to Mexico and other places and doing all these archaeological digs. And the church was funding a lot of that work, of course. So I knew that, that we must have, sorry about that, we must have some evidence. And, they've unearthed certain things like different stela and stuff that they've tried to interpret as like the tree of life and stuff. I think a good example of that actually is right here. But ultimately, I had conversations with different apologists, and I think I actually had a really good conversation online with Daniel Peterson. And then I just asked him bluntly, I says, well, okay, so what evidence do we actually have? What hard evidence do we have? And his honest answer to me was zero. We have nothing. And so that kind of, sealed the deal for me to say, okay, too much too much smoke. We must have fire. So basically, yes, the Book of Mormon is not historical, in my opinion. Now, that's an opinion. So some LDS people, Mormons, other practicing faithful Latter-day Saints will say that's a bridge too far. But that's where I say, look, we have to be realistic here. We have to be logical. At some point, the emperor has no clothes, and that's kind of where I'm at with this. So let's now talk about, so what do we do with that, right? Well, as we know, for many years, the church kind of promoted this whole Joseph Smith translation of the plates, sort of imagery that we see here on the right. Whereas now more recent evidence or more recent work is showing that he actually used a stone in the hat method of translation. So it really wasn't translation. I mean, he wasn't looking at plates. He wasn't actually translating anything. He was, I guess, more so than anything else, he was using this stone. I don't know if it's exactly this brown stone, but this is one of the ones that shows up like on the, if you do Google search for his seer stones. But basically, you've got this stone that he's using, and he's using it in a hat. And so, in my opinion, he's receiving the Book of Mormon through revelation or inspiration. It's not really a translation per se. So so yes, it's not historical. I don't know exactly what the plates were, if they were a real thing or not. I mean, I don't think any of us will ever know that. So, I mean, we can talk, and we'll get into other discussions about the motives of Joseph Smith for creating this record. But maybe there was other motives or something going on. But my conclusion is that it was not historical, and perhaps he thought it was. I don't know. But bottom line is it was. The Book of Mormon must have been received by inspiration. Now, if we dive into a little further, I'm going to talk about what I think the Book of Mormon actually is. So yeah, it's a 19th century work. I just call it a literary work. It's not a translation. It's not an ancient work. I think it's obvious if you actually start looking at some of the parts that were borrowed from Isaiah and some of the other New Testament books as well, that Joseph Smith was using the Bible, and of course he borrowed quite heavily from it, and inserted quite a few chapters or passages from the Bible directly into the Book of Mormon. And it turns out that some of those passages have errors or whatever from the particular edition of the Bible that he was using. So you have to ask, well, then why would those be there if this was truly like translated from an ancient work? It wouldn't have a 18th century, 17th century, typos or whatever the issues were. So yes, he borrowed heavily from the Bible. So I mean, some of it was just borrowing from the Bible, in my opinion. So again, it's not a translation. I would consider it an inspired work. It now does preach and testify of Jesus Christ. And of course, I think that is the saving grace of the Book of Mormon. It's basically another testament of Jesus Christ. And that alone is significant in my mind. Now, there has been a lot of speculation about how it was actually created. Was it, there's been a lot of people and a lot of books written about Spalding and other authors that came before Joseph Smith, and perhaps he borrowed from them. But really, I've read a lot of books on that, and I haven't came to any really firm conclusion that any of those hold any water. So, again, my opinion is that it is an inspired work, but it's not a translation, and it's not a translation of an ancient record per se. However, if it is inspired, so where did that inspiration come from? So if it was inspired from God, then obviously it can still be scripture, just like revelations were recorded from Joseph Smith and written down and it became our modern day Doctrine and Covenants. And so those were not ancient records or ancient histories of people. So does scripture have to be historical? I guess that's a good question. And also, does the non-historicity of the Book of Mormon, call into question the prophetic mantle of Joseph Smith and basically, his claims as being a prophet? I think more than anything else, if it was a translation, then I don't know. To me, it seems like actually the fact that he received it through revelation is perhaps even stronger evidence that he was a prophet rather than not being a prophet. I mean, even as silly as that may sound, again, there's still a lot of questions that need to be asked, and I probably will dive into those further in a future video. But yeah, I don't think, first of all, that the Book of Mormon has to be historical to be considered scripture. Now, do I rate it as high as, say, I rate the Bible? I don't know. I don't know that I give it quite as much weight based on the fact that it's not historical, but I still give it weight as scripture, and the fact that it is a second testament of Jesus Christ, I think that also itself carries quite a bit of weight. So again, I know a lot of practicing and faithful LDS will have a hard time with accepting the fact that the Book of Mormon is not historical. I mean, that really, it can be a hard pill to swallow at first, but I think after you give it some thought and really think about it, then you can realize that, Joseph Smith received it through inspiration and revelation, and the fact that it's historical or not really has no bearing on its importance. At least especially its importance within our theology and our doctrine. So, anyways, that's kind of my take on the Book of Mormon and the DNA and other issues that have been brought up, by the CES letter and other critics of the church. So I think we still can use the Book of Mormon. I think it's still scripture, and I have no problem with it not being historical. All right, guys, I think that's enough for today. If you have any questions or would like me to explore other subjects, I'd be happy to get your feedback. And once again, we will talk to you all later.